So good morning, everybody. This is the really the restart of the Christian education that we do here at Hope Church. I'm sure most of you have been a part of Hope Church for a while, and you know that it's been a long tradition of hope, that the Christian education is a strong component. It's been one of the things that, frankly, we've missed a lot in this COVID time, and now here we are. I'm sure we'll have a little bit of difficulties and strange things to work through as we work it out on Zoom, but I'm very excited to be here with all of you and restarting Christian education here at Hope. Just a couple of things, Zoom protocol. So for those of you in the sanctuary, I know Nate and Kojo were getting a wireless microphone. I think Sunday school classes work best when we're talking with and to each other. So I do have some remarks prepared, but frankly, I really want a lot of interaction. So if you're on Zoom, please feel free to jump off Zoom and add your thoughts to the discussion, just like we would if we were sitting all together in the lounge, as we all desire to do.
Are you going to join in for Sunday?
Go ahead. I think somebody's.
Sure. Because I'm doing it on my phone is how I was doing it, but we can do it on here.
Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
I am hearing somebody, so we will, frankly, you'll hear a dog bark probably and hear my kids running around in the background. So we'll deal with any little background noises in Zoom. Do feel free to come off Zoom, but or come off mute, excuse me. But if you're not actively trying to speak to the group, try to stay on mute.
There we are.
Good morning, David and Ray.
Hey, good morning.
Good morning, David and Ray. Good to see you.
Good morning. Can you hear us?
We can hear you just fine. Yes.
Okay.
Good morning.
Good morning. You look.
And I can even see you.
You look bright-eyed and bushy-tailed this morning.
Yeah, I was having just a little bit of trouble hearing you, so.
Okay.
We'll bear with it.
Okay.
We'll bear with it. Anyway, so welcome for those of you just joining to the Christian education. I think most of you know me, but if you don't know me, I am Brandon Perkins. I'm an elder in training here at Hope. And what does that mean? That really means spending a lot of time with a session, enjoying their prayer meetings, learning lots of wisdom from those folks, as well as spending some time teaching God's word. So that's really what we're off to do this morning and in these next several weeks that we'll spend together. I've taught Sunday school, Christian education many times before here at Hope. I'm very excited to be able to do it again and to join you via Zoom. So we'll all work through it together and learn this new world. So with those introductory remarks, let's go ahead and start in prayer. If you'll join me in prayer, and then we'll get right into the lesson. Our Father in heaven, we thank you for this time that we have to spend together. Our hearts long to be with each other, to put our arms around each other, to shake hands, and to show each other how much we love each other in person. But we do thank you for these means that we have to be together in these times. We do ask for your blessing on the technology, that we would be able to hear and see and understand each other well as we're speaking together. And we do ask that you would bless this time, that your word would go into our hearts, that our spiritual lives would be renewed and refreshed and strengthened because of these words that we'll spend reading together this morning. Thank you so much for this time, and we ask for your blessing upon it now. Amen. All right. Well, as Nate has been announcing for several weeks now, we'll be working on talking about the attributes of God from Exodus 34. Give me just a second. I'll share my screen. Perhaps I'll share my screen. Right on. All right. I think everybody should be able to see that now. So we'll be in Exodus 34. This Exodus 34, 6 through 7 will be our main passage. But we'll spend a lot of time today, frankly, going through some larger context surrounding this passage. So let's read the core passage. This will be the key passage. I want to set it out for us right here at the very beginning so that we all have these words echoing around in our minds as we start, and then we'll go and together read some of the larger context for this passage. So the first verses are Exodus 34, 6 and 7, and I'll be reading from the ESV. The Lord passed before him and proclaimed, the Lord, a God merciful and gracious, slow to anger and abounding in steadfast love and faithfulness, keeping steadfast love for thousands, forgiving iniquity and transgression and sin, but who will by no means clear the guilty, visiting the iniquity of the fathers on the children and the children's children to the third and the fourth generation. So these passages have been called by some of the commentators that I've been reading in preparation for this, have been called the high point of revelation in the Bible. And they point to these verses apart from the incarnation of Jesus as some of the most clear expression of who God is, his name, his attributes, and how he acts with his people. So Nate suggested a while ago that this would be a good place to spend some time in Christian education. And I've been very helped by this as I've been preparing for this series, and I hope you will be too. So just by way of talking through what we intend to do, I always like to know at the beginning of starting into a class like this, what the plan is, what the weeks will look like. We'll plan to spend 3 weeks here in December going through this Christian education class. Then we'll take a couple weeks off for the holidays, those 2 Sundays right around Christmas. And then we'll pick back up in January and do the last 2 weeks of this class. So our first week here, there'll be a fair amount of introduction, a fair amount of context, and we'll start into talking about that first attribute that God talks about in the Exodus passage, about his being merciful and gracious. Next week, we'll spend a little bit of time just recapping the introduction, finishing up any thoughts about God's mercy and grace, and then talk about the attribute of him being slow to anger. In week 3, the third attribute, abounding in steadfast love and faithfulness. Then, as you heard in the passage, the last 2, keeping steadfast love for thousands. And then that final one, visiting the iniquity of the fathers on the children and the children's children, and a conclusion. So nominally a 5-week class. Frankly, we'll see how it goes. As with most things, plans change. So we'll, if things need to adjust as we go along, as things take longer, as we see some time that we want to spend and dwell on one of these a little bit more, we'll certainly feel free to be flexible with this, but this is the general outline of how I expect this class to go. All right, so now is our time. We'll ask folks on Zoom in the sanctuary. We'll do some really extended reading. I think the 2 chapters just preceding these verses that we read are very helpful context. It's helpful to see what's going on with Israel, with Moses, with God's relationship with Israel. Just preceding this, what we've called the high point, one of the high points of revelation in the Bible. And so we'll read these 2 chapters, 32 and 33, and then we'll read this first section in verse 34. So here's the volunteer time. If someone could volunteer to read Exodus 32, if someone would volunteer to read Exodus 33, and then a third person can take the first 11 chapters of verse 34. So if you're willing, I know It'll take just a minute to flip to those pages, but if someone will read aloud Exodus 32, we'll start there.
All right, Brandon, I'll read it.
Thanks, John.
Are you good? Okay, here we go. When the people saw that Moses delayed to come down from the mountain, the people gathered themselves together to Aaron and said to him, "Up, make us gods who shall go before us. As for this Moses, the man who brought us up out of the land of Egypt, we do not know what has become of him." So Aaron said to them, "Take off the rings of gold that are in the ears of your wives, your sons, and your daughters, and bring them to me." So all the people took off the rings of gold that were in their ears and brought them to Aaron. And he received the gold from their hand and fashioned it with a graving tool and made a golden calf. And they said, "These are your gods, O Israel, who brought you up out of the land of Egypt." When Aaron saw this, he built an altar before it. And Aaron made a proclamation and said, "Tomorrow shall be a feast to the Lord." And they rose up early the next day and offered burnt offerings and brought peace offerings. And the people sat down to eat and drink and rose up to play. And the Lord said to Moses, "Go down, for your people whom you have brought up out of the land of Egypt have corrupted themselves. They have turned aside quickly out of the way that I commanded them. They have made for themselves a golden calf and have worshipped it and sacrificed to it, and said, 'These are your gods, O Israel, who brought you up out of the land of Egypt.' And the Lord said to Moses, 'I have seen this people, and behold, it is a stiff-necked people. Now therefore let me alone, that my wrath may burn hot against them, and I may consume them, in order that I may make a great nation of you.' But Moses implored the Lord his God and said, 'O Lord, why does your wrath burn hot against your people, whom you have brought out of the land of Egypt with great power and with a mighty hand? Why should the Egyptians say, with evil intent did he bring them out, to kill them in the mountains and to consume them from the face of the earth? Turn from your burning anger and relent against this disaster against your people. Remember Abraham, Isaac, and Israel, your servants, to whom you swore by your own self and said to them, I will multiply your offspring as the stars of heaven, and all this land that I have promised I will give to your offspring, and they shall inherit it forever.' And the Lord relented from the disaster that he had spoken of, bringing on his people. Then Moses turned and went down from the mountain with the 2 tablets of the testimony in his hand, tablets that were written on both sides. On the front and on the back they were written. The tablets were the work of God, and the writing was the writing of God, engraved on the tablets. When Joshua heard the noise of the people as they shouted, he said to Moses, 'There is a noise of war in the camp.' But he said, 'It is not the sound of shouting for victory, or the sound of the cry of defeat, but the sound of singing that I hear.' And as soon as he came near the camp and saw the calf and the dancing, Moses' anger burned hot, and he threw the tablets out of his hands and broke them at the foot of the mountain. He took the calf that they had made and burned it with fire, and ground it to powder, and scattered it on the water, and made the people of Israel drink it. And Moses said to Aaron, 'What did this people do to you, that you have brought such a great sin upon them?' And Aaron said, 'Let not the anger of my Lord burn hot. You know the people, that they are set on evil. For they said to me, Make us gods who shall go before us. As for this Moses, the man who brought us up out of the land of Egypt, we do not know what has become of him.' So I said to them, 'Let any who have gold take it off.' So they gave it to me, and I threw it into the fire, and out came this calf. And when Moses saw that the people had broken loose, for Aaron had let them break loose, to the derision of their enemies, then Moses stood in the gate of the camp and said, 'Who is on the Lord's side? come to me." And all the sons of Levi gathered around him. And he said to them, "Thus says the Lord God of Israel, put your sword on your side, each of you, and go to and fro from gate to gate throughout the camp, and each of you kill his brother and his companion and his neighbor." And the sons of Levi did according to the word of Moses. And that day about 3,000 men of the people fell. And Moses said, "Today you have been ordained for the service of the Lord, each one at the cost of his son and of his brother, so that he might bestow a blessing upon you this day." The next day Moses said to the people, "You have sinned a great sin, and now I will go up to the Lord. Perhaps I can make atonement for your sin." So Moses returned to the Lord and said, "Alas, this people has sinned a great sin. They have made for themselves gods of gold. But now if you will forgive their sin, but if not, please blot me out of your book which you have written." But the Lord said to Moses, "Whoever has sinned against me, I will blot out of my book. But now go, lead the people to the place about which I have spoken to you. Behold, my angel shall go before you. Nevertheless, in the day when I visit, I will visit their sin upon them." Then the Lord sent a plague on the people because they made the calf, the one that Aaron made.
Thanks, John. Is there someone ready to read Exodus 33?
I will, Brandon.
Thank you, Ray.
Then the Lord said to Moses, "Leave this place, you and the people you brought up out of Egypt, and go up to the land I promised on oath to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, saying, I will give it to your descendants. I will send an angel before you and drive out the Canaanites, Amorites, Hittites, Perizzites, Hivites, and Jebusites. Go up to the land flowing with milk and honey. But I will not go with you, because you are a stiff-necked people, and I might destroy you on the way." When the people heard these distressing words, they began to mourn, and no one put on any ornaments. For the Lord had said to Moses, "Tell the Israelites, you are a stiff-necked people. If I were to go with you even for a moment, I might destroy you. Now take off your ornaments, and I will decide what to do with you." So the Israelites stripped off their ornaments at Mount Horeb. Now Moses used to take a tent and pitch it outside the camp some distance away, calling it the tent of meeting. Anyone inquiring of the Lord would go to the tent of meeting outside the camp. And whenever Moses went out to the tent, all the people rose and stood at the entrance to their tents, watching Moses until he entered the tent. As Moses went into the tent, the pillar of cloud would come down and stay at the entrance while the Lord spoke with Moses. Whenever the people saw the pillar of cloud standing at the entrance to the tent, they all stood and worshiped, each at the entrance to his tent. The Lord would speak to Moses face to face, as a man speaks with his friend. Then Moses would return to the camp, but his young aide, Joshua, son of Nun, did not leave the tent. Moses said to the Lord, "You have been telling me, lead these people, but you have not let me know whom you will send with me. You have said, I know you by name, and you have found favor with me. If you are pleased with me, teach me your ways, so that I may know you and continue to find favor with you. Remember that this nation is your people." The Lord replied, "My presence will go with you, and I will give you rest." Then Moses said to him, "If your presence does not go with us, do not send us up from here. How will anyone know that you are pleased with me and with your people unless you go with us? What else will distinguish me and your people from all the other people on the face of the earth?" And the Lord said to Moses, "I will do the very thing you have asked, because I am pleased with you and I know you by name." Then Moses said, "Now show me your glory." And the Lord said, "I will cause all my goodness to pass in front of you, and I will proclaim my name, the Lord, in your presence. I will have mercy on whom I will have mercy, and I will have compassion on whom I will have compassion. But he said, "You cannot see my face, for no one may see me and live." Then the Lord said, "There is a place near me where you may stand on a rock. When my glory passes by, I will put you in a cleft in the rock and cover you with my hand until I have passed by. Then I will remove my hand and you will see my back, but my face must not be seen."
Thank you, Ray. And then finally, the first 11 verses of chapter 34.
I'll read them. The Lord said to Moses, "Cut for yourself 2 tablets of stone like the first, and I will write on the tablets the words that were on the first tablets, which he broke. Be ready by the morning and come up in the morning to Mount Sinai and present yourself there to me on the top of the mountain. No one shall come up with you, and let no one be seen throughout all the mountain. Let no flocks or herds graze opposite that mountain." So Moses cut 2 tablets of stone like the first, and he rose early in the morning and went up on Mount Sinai as the Lord had commanded him. And he took in his hand 2 tablets of stone. The Lord descended in the cloud and stood with him there and proclaimed the name of the Lord. The Lord passed before him and proclaimed, the Lord, a God merciful and gracious, slow to anger and abounding in steadfast love and faithfulness, keeping steadfast love for thousands, forgiving iniquity and transgression and sin, but who will by no means clear the guilty, visiting the iniquity of the fathers on the children and the children's children to the 3rd and the 4th generation. And Moses quickly bowed his head toward the earth and worshipped. And he said, "If now I have found favor in your sight, O Lord, please let the Lord go in the midst of us, for it is a stiff-necked people, and pardon our iniquity and our sin, and take us for your inheritance." And he said, "Behold, I am making a covenant. Before all your people I will do marvels such as have not been created in all the earth or in any nation. And all the people among whom you are shall see the work of the Lord, for it is an awesome thing that I will do with you. Observe what I command you this day. Behold, I will drive out before you the Amorites, the Canaanites, the Hittites, the Perizzites, the Hivites, and the Jebusites." That's it, right? First 11 verses?
Yeah, just through those 11 verses. So I thought it was useful to do this extended read, both because it's very good to hear God's word, and hearing his dealings with Israel are important for us understanding our relationship with him. But I think it's really important for surrounding that extended context for what it is God's talking about, what's just happened before, what's about to happen when he proclaims his name to Moses and gives Moses these 5 attributes that we're going to study in this time that we have. So just to recap, so what you heard, Moses is up mountain, he's getting the first tablets of the law. While he's up there, the people decide that he's been gone too long, they can't wait anymore, they need something to worship. And so they and Aaron make the golden calf. Moses comes down, warned by God that the Israelites are misbehaving and that they've turned away from him. He comes down the mountain and he's so stunned by what he sees and by the disobedience of the Israelites that he shatters the first tablets. We have this whole extended passage talking about the judgment on the 3,000. If you remember, that's where Moses burns the calf, grinds it into powder, makes the Israelites drink it, and then the Levites go through the camp and put to death the 3,000. And then this extended part through the end of verse 33, and in verse 30, chapter 33 and chapter 34, of Moses spending these extended intercession times with God, asking God to show his glory to him and his mercy on the people. So we'll take just a few moments. Any things that you heard there? These are such familiar passages, such familiar stories. I know many of us have probably been learning them for most of our lives, but anything you heard there, anything you thought that was particularly striking about what you saw in those passages?
Well, for me, just the very fact that initially it was almost as though Moses reminded God when he was going to get rid of them, what's that going to look like? It's almost like he was able to talk to God and cause God to change his mind. That's what it sounded like to me. But obviously that's not what happened, but that's the way it sounded to me listening in this flesh that I've been given. So yeah.
Yeah, God's initial plan is to wipe out the Israelites and to take Moses and to essentially renew the Abrahamic covenant with Moses and make a new nation from Moses.
Yeah.
And that's what Moses says. Hold on, let's not do that. And yeah, it's, the words are God relents. God turns away from what he was going to do to the Israelites, and there's mystery there. We know that God doesn't change, that he's the same yesterday, today, and forever. But when it comes down to his dealing with Moses here, that's certainly what he's working on. That what the passage is talking about is he turns from what he was going to do.
And then Moses stands for, he's so much like Jesus. He says, remember, this nation is your people. He stands between God and the people. That's what really struck me this time.
Mm-hmm. Any other thoughts? Any things that were particularly striking? I love hearing from you. I've missed so much these times that we've had together. Thank you. Thank you all.
I was really struck. I'll just speak up about in the part that I read about Moses asking for the people to be God's inheritance. And in the New Testament, it talks about Jesus getting his people, like God giving him his church is like giving him an inheritance. And this idea, even back there, that the people would be to God something precious to him. I don't really understand it, but that whole thought of for God's people to be to God an inheritance, I don't really understand it, but it's kind of stunning.
Yeah. Especially after what they've done.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
This whole idea.
Right, but it's just so mysterious. I mean, God doesn't. Go ahead, David.
Yeah. The whole idea of
I mean, God doesn't need anything. Oh, the whole idea.
Okay, I'll play referee. David Whitehead, you talk, and we'll wait until you're done.
No, I'll wait.
Just go.
Well, what I was struck by was the fact that the people, they didn't know what to do. No, Moses had, as far as they were concerned, had perished. So they take what's really valuable to them. And I was struck by the fact that Aaron, who's the second in command, allowed himself to be almost led in the wrong direction. He wasn't exercising the leadership that he should have been exercising. And then they make this calf. And really, they're worshiping themselves. Really, it's something that they've created, that their hands create. And obviously we know that it doesn't breathe, it doesn't see, it has no value. except to them, I guess. So I guess that that really struck me. You know, they were worshiping themselves.
And isn't that like us?
Yeah.
When we worship what we've made or make an idol of what we've made. Yeah.
And I think, to me, this go through of these passages, for me, what was striking, exactly the part that David was talking about. When Moses comes down, do you hear what he says to Aaron? He says, "What did these people do to you that you decided to let this great sin come upon this?" Almost like Aaron didn't really get it. Aaron thought that God was going to destroy the people. Moses almost says to him, "Why did you want to get rid of these people? Why did you let them do this to get them destroyed?" Essentially. And there's, so beyond the making of the golden calf and then lying about it, look what popped out of the fire. It's almost as if Moses is saying, Aaron, you are trying to get these people destroyed. Why are you doing this? And I thought that was very interesting. And Aaron is wrong here. He's wrong. That's what God's going to do. We see God's mercy and his grace and his forgiveness that comes. All right, Leslie, I think that was you. Do you want to?
And yet the priests still descend from Aaron. The priestly line still comes from him. God is merciful to him. He's not cut out. He's not cut off.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's amazing.
All right. For the sake of time, we'll continue moving on. Just very quickly, I'll go and read Exodus 3:1-15. I think this is an important comparison, just to think about what's going on in this passage. So, if you remember Exodus 3, this is the image of the burning bush. And just listen and see if you can hear some of the same things from this Exodus 3 passage as what we just heard in the 32-34 passage. Now Moses was keeping the flock of his father-in-law Jethro, the priest of Midian, and he led his flock to the west side of the wilderness and came to Horeb, the mountain of God. And the angel of the Lord appeared to him in a flame of fire out of the midst of a bush. He looked, and behold, the bush was burning, yet it was not consumed. And Moses said, "I will turn aside to see this great sight, why the bush is not burned." When the Lord saw that he turned aside to see, God called to him out of the bush, "Moses, Moses." And he said, "Here I am." Then he said, "Do not come near. Take your sandals off your feet, for the place on which you are standing is holy ground." And he said, "I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob." And Moses hid his face, for he was afraid to look at God. Then the Lord said, "I have surely seen the affliction of my people who are in Egypt and have heard their cry because of their taskmasters. I know their sufferings, and I have come down to deliver them out of the hand of the Egyptians and to bring them up out of that land to a good and broad land, a land flowing with milk and honey, to the place of the Canaanites, the Hittites, the Amorites, the Perizzites, the Hivites, and the Jebusites. And now, behold, the cry of the people of Israel has come to me, and I have also seen the oppression with which the Egyptians oppress them. Come, I will send you to Pharaoh, that you may bring my people, the children of Israel, out of Egypt." But Moses said to God, "Who am I that I should go to Pharaoh and bring the children of Israel out of Egypt?" He said, "But I will be with you, and this shall be the sign for you that I have sent you. When you have brought the people out of Egypt, you shall serve God on this mountain." Oh, excuse me, we'll go through 15. Then Moses said to God, "If I come to the people of Israel and say to them, 'The God of your fathers has sent me to you,' and they ask me, 'What is his name?' what shall I say to them?" God said to Moses, "I am who I am." And he said, "Say to this people of Israel, 'I am has sent me to you.'" God also said to Moses, say to the people of Israel, the Lord, the God of your fathers, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob, has sent me to you. This is my name forever, and thus I am to be remembered throughout all generations. So a few key things to hear there. So that very famous, again, a very famous Sunday school passage, Moses in the burning bush. Who is it that God says he is when Moses says, what should I tell the people of Israel when they ask me who it is that sent me?
Am who I am.
Yeah. Yeah, and then later in verse 15, he says, the Lord. And most of you probably know, and I think it's coming through okay on the presentation, but this writing of the Lord, when it's L and then in all capitals ORD, that's something that Bible translators use to signal that there's a particular name of God being used. And this name that's being used is Yahweh, which has been called God's salvation name. And there's a promise in that name. So it's not just the Lord that we should be hearing. We should be hearing that that's God's salvation name. And that in this context of him rescuing the Israelites from Egypt, and all the way at the back end of the book in 4, where he's renewing the covenant with Israel through Moses and telling Moses that he'll be with him and that he'll be with the people. He uses that same name, that same Yahweh, that salvation name. And there really is a promise in that name. And then here in our passage in chapter 34, there's an expansion and an expounding on that name. So I think the last bit that we'll do for this morning, since our time is running short. So we've done some extended discussion about the surrounding context. Let's get to the immediate context of God's discussion of his name and who he is in chapter 34. And we'll go back to Exodus 33, verses 18 and 19. And I want you to listen, as you hear Moses talking to God, I want you to listen for what God talks about as his glory in these 2 verses. Moses said, please show me your glory. And he said, I will make all my goodness pass before you and will proclaim before you my name, the Lord. Again, the salvation name, this Yahweh name. And I will be gracious to whom I will be gracious, and I will show mercy on whom I will show mercy. Yeah. So when you think of God's glory, what does it mean? We use this word. It's a very Christian word. It's a very, very religious word. You don't hear it in many other contexts. So what do we mean when we say glory? And when I think of it, and I'll ask for a response from you too, but what is God like? What is his, one of the commentators I read called it his distinctive resplendence, which I thought was an interesting way to talk about it. And then one last thought about glory. For some of you who are here for the time where Tom Corey was our pastor, you may or may not remember this, but he was talking about God's glory in a particular sermon. And I happened to have out-of-town guests. I won't say who it was, but I had out-of-town guests that were visiting us that weekend. They came to church with us. In Tom's sermon illustration to talk about glory, he was talking about the weight. What is the weight of God? What is the impact that God makes? And so the sermon illustration was he had a bathroom scale up on the stage, and he called all of the men that were in the church to come up, and he weighed each of them, and he determined who was the most glorious man in the whole congregation that day. And it happened to be my out-of-town guest, which was probably not the best sermon illustration ever. And Tom and I have laughed about it quite a bit since, but I always remember that, it was very memorable to me, that, glory is the weight of God and who he, that impact, that presence he has. We talk about the 900-pound gorilla in the room. Well, that's this idea of glory. So I'm just interested, when you think about glory, when you study God's glory, what do you think of?
I think that it was distinctive resplendence. Is that what you said?
His distinctive resplendence. Yeah.
That, to me, that says it. Wow.
I thought that really captured it well. Yeah. Well, and we'll talk more about this next week, but in chapter, or in verse 19 here in 33, when Moses talks about that, when we think in our limited understanding, when we think about God's glory, I don't always, I'll confess, I don't always go to the answer that God gave Moses. And what was the answer when Moses said, "Show me your glory"? What does God say He'll show him? Well, this is in verse 19.
I will cause all my goodness to pass in front of you, and you will proclaim my name, the Lord. Wow. And I will have mercy on whom I will have mercy, and I will have compassion on whom I will have compassion.
Yeah. So when Moses asked God for his glory, what does God say? How does God talk about himself? This is what that's what he talks about: his goodness, his graciousness, his mercy, his compassion. And that to me knocks my socks off, frankly. God doesn't talk about throwing the stars into the heavens or any of that. Of course, that's all there. He's the creator. But when Moses says, "I want to see your glory," God says, "Yes, I'll show you my goodness. I'll show you my mercy. I'll show you my compassion." And I find that just so stunning, so refreshing, so challenging as I think about who God is. So with that context set up for the first week, and as I said, plans usually go out the window as soon as you make them. So we'll spend some time next week really finishing up this introduction part, and then we'll move on to the mercy and grace of God as part of our study for next week. So I see the clock says 9:45. It's 9:46 now. So would someone volunteer to close us in prayer, and then we'll let the Zoom call be ready to receive the rest of the folks coming in for church. David Whitehead, will you close us in prayer?
Certainly. You certainly are a glorious God, and this plan of salvation that you started so long ago is being completed in us. And we thank you for the opportunity that we have today to be reminded that Jesus came and gave his life for us. And as we come to worship and be part of the Lord's Supper, may it be a blessed time for us. Be with us throughout this day. Bless us as we continue to be a blessing to you. And we're grateful for this opportunity that we have to study your word. Your word is a lamp unto our feet and a light unto our path. Be with us in all that we do this day. And we want to bring you glory and honor and praise. And we ask all this in your precious name, Jesus. Amen.